Have you ever heard of a rap beef that went beyond musica? Brutal gang war where friends turned enemies, explosives were used, and people were sent on missions they never returned from. This is the violent story of two London neighborhoods, and Brixton locked in one of the city's deadliest rivalries. This was no ordinary battle. This was a war where guns spoke louder than words. When London's notorious gangs, the Peckham Boys and Gas Gang, clashed, their streets ran red with blood, and survival became a deadly game with no winners. Imagine a war where rap lyrics were backed by real bullets, where music and violence collided on London's streets. This is the raw, unfiltered story of Peckham and Brixton, a rivalry so fierce, it changed the face of South London forever. Have you ever heard of a rap beef so extreme that gang members were sent on missions they were never meant to come back from? A war so wild that people were ambushed, explosives were used, and even friends turned on each other in the streets. That is exactly what happened when two gangs from London, Peckham and Brixton, went head-to-head in one of the city's most violent rivalries. Peckham and Brixton are two well-known neighborhoods in South London, with a history of tension stretching back all the way to the 1950s, while conflicts simmered for decades. It was in the 2000s that things escalated to truly alarming levels, as violence spiraled out of control and turned the streets into dangerous battlegrounds. Both neighborhoods were home to numerous gangs, but the most notorious and feared groups were the Peckham Boys from Peckham and Gas Gang from Brixton. The Peckham Boys first emerged in the 1980s as a unified gang, but as the years passed, they fractured into smaller, more specialized factions. By the early 2000s, the Peckham Boys had splintered into multiple generations of crews, each with its own identity and reputation. The original Peckham Boys remained active, but alongside them were the younger Peckham Boys, known as YPB, who represented the newer generation coming up in the streets. Below them were the even younger Peckham Boys, or YYPB, and then the Peckham Kids PK, who were the youngest members of the Peckham scene, although the names were confusing and overlapping. The one thing these groups had in common was their reputation for stirring up chaos and violence on the streets, making headlines regularly. This fractured but fierce gang structure meant that violence wasn't limited to one group within Peckham. Instead, every crew had its own battles, both with rival gangs and sometimes among themselves. The result was an environment charged with tension and conflict, with fights, shootings, and stabbings becoming far too common. Each generation of Peckham Boys wanted to prove themselves, maintain respect, and defend their turf, which led to an endless cycle of retaliation and escalating violence. Meanwhile, in Brixton, Gas Gang was carving out a reputation as the most violent and feared crew. They were known for their ruthlessness and their ability to control large parts of Brixton. Their influence was significant, and they often clashed with Peckham crews over territory and respect. The rivalry between these two South London neighborhoods was not new, but the intensity of the conflict increased dramatically during this period. One of the reasons the violence reached such dangerous heights was the easier availability of weapons at the time. Guns and knives were becoming more common on the streets of London, and this made every confrontation far more deadly. The Peckham Boys and Gas Gang, along with their affiliates, began to arm themselves heavily, leading to more frequent and brutal attacks. Shootouts, ambushes, and violent stabbings became part of daily life in these communities, terrifying residents and attracting widespread media attention. The gang culture in Peckham also saw a unique dynamic with the many subgroups, each representing different age groups. This layering meant that not only were rival gangs clashing, but sometimes younger members would carry on vendettas or start new conflicts based on older disputes. The presence of multiple crews within Peckham itself sometimes led to internal strife, further complicating the situation and making peace harder to achieve. At the same time, the rappers and musicians emerging from these neighborhoods often reflected the realities of these harsh environments in their lyrics. Figures like Snap Capone and Nutty from Peckham used their music to tell stories of the streets, the violence, and their struggles. This public airing of gang-related matters often added fuel to the fire, as diss tracks and boasting about violence sometimes led to real-life confrontations. Music became another battleground where crews fought for respect and dominance, blurring the lines between art and reality. Despite the chaos, there were moments when the gangs tried to cool down tensions, often after significant losses or changes in leadership, but these periods of relative calm rarely lasted, as new rivalries sparked or old feuds reignited. The complex web of alliances, betrayals, and revenge made it difficult for any lasting peace to take hold. In conclusion, the story of Peckham and Brixton in the 2000s is one of fractured gang loyalties, escalating violence, and a neighborhood rivalry that shaped much of South London's street culture. The Peckham Boys, with their many factions, and Brixton's gas gang, both left deep marks on their communities, marks defined by fear, power struggles, and the search for respect in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Their histories are a stark reminder of how far-reaching and destructive gang conflicts can become when fueled by youth, weapons, and deep-seated rivalries. In 2000, members of YPB stabbed a man to death with a broken beer bottle. That moment shocked people and made them realize just how dangerous things were getting in Peckham. The gang names kept changing, too. Crews like Spare No One, Peckham Young Gunners, Shoot Instant, and Don't Mess Around were pushing violence even harder. At that time, it was easier to get guns in London, which only made things worse. By 2004, the Peckham Boys were locked in a deadly war with another group, the Ghetto Boys. The Ghetto Boys had connections all over South London, especially in Lewisham, and their rivalry with Peckham had already lasted for years. Things got out of control when members from both sides ran into each other at the Urban Music Awards in 2004. Gunshots rang out, and a stray bullet hit a woman in the chest. Miraculously, the underwire in her bra stopped the bullet and saved her life. A Ghetto Boys member was arrested, but that was just the beginning. In 2006, the Ghetto Boys launched an attack, shooting up Peckham territory twice. In response, the Peckham Boys allegedly struck back by killing 2 men in Brixton linked to the Ghetto Boys. The violence spread to other areas like New Cross, where Peckham members smashed a bottle over someone's head. Then, just days later, around 40 Peckham gang members stormed into New Cross armed with knives and brutally stabbed a man named Jason Gale Brennan to death. Jason had once been part of the Ghetto Boys but left the gang life after surviving a stabbing. He was just hanging out on the block when the attackers mistook him for someone else and took his life. That same night, they stabbed another man in Deptford, but he survived. The Ghetto Boys refused to back down. The very next day, they showed up at a basketball court in Peckham and opened fire. No one was hit, but the violence kept getting worse. By October 2008, another shootout broke out between the two groups and this time, it killed an innocent woman. Eventually, things began to calm down. Against all odds, the Ghetto Boys and Peckham Boys made peace. This truce might never have happened if it were not for a shocking betrayal inside the Ghetto Boys. Their top leader, known as Sparks, was murdered by his own people. Sparks had a violent history, including an alleged murder outside a nightclub in 2002. But the case fell apart when witnesses stayed silent in 2006. Sparks went too far when he beat up the father of his close friend, Delphin Nicholas, and stole his car. Delphin was in prison at the time but managed to sneak in a phone. He set up a fake weed deal for Sparks and, when Sparks showed up, Delphin's guy Trevor pulled the trigger. Sparks was killed, and the Ghetto Boys started falling apart, breaking into smaller groups and losing interest in the Peckham beef. That marked the end of an era of brutal warfare in South London. But the peace did not last long. A new storm was coming, one even worse than the Ghetto Boys' war. This time, it was Peckham versus Brixton. Things exploded when Brixton gang members ambushed 2 rappers from Peckham, Snap Capone and Nutty. Snap Capone had a reputation for being one of the most feared guys in Peckham. In one song, he bragged about killing 2 men, shooting 20 others, and never getting touched. His lyrics were graphic: headshots clean, gloves at night, see red in my eyes, like Cyclops. According to the streets, Snap even shot one of his own friends. The rumor: a man named Benny stole Snap's gun, so Snap got another weapon and shot him in another track called 4 Summers. Snap rapped, fresh home from jail, completed 4 summers, calling a meeting if the money's in numbers. I am not greedy, feed all my youngers. And just like that, the cycle of violence began again with lyrics, bullets, betrayal, and blood. Of how deeply gang violence affected South London in the 2000s, it showed how personal disputes and rivalries could escalate into deadly encounters, and how the consequences extended far beyond the gangs themselves, touching the lives of everyday people. For Snap, Capone and Nutty, surviving that night was just one chapter in a long and violent saga, one that shaped their lives, their music, and the communities around them. After the attack, some OC members rapped mocking Snap and Nutty for hiding in the shop. But Peckham's Pie Crew Young Size T, Snap, and Stigs hit back hard with their track Real Riders. They warned the Brixton crew, when I roll up on your block, something's gonna happen. Snap, Capone and Nutty survived the Brixton attacks, but tensions kept rising. Soon, Brixton struck again, killing a man named Terms. Rumor has it someone leaked Terms' location, and shooters waited outside his home, killing him in cold blood. Meanwhile, some crews who once sided with Peckham switched sides and linked up with Brixton. For example, Obi-Wan switched alliances but lost a member to stabbing right after. That member tried to fake having a gun to scare the other side but got chased down and killed when they realized it was fake. The police tried cracking down on the gangs and even blocked rappers from holding shows. Giggs, a major London rapper, rose up at this time, representing Peckham's Spare No One crew, or SN1, though he had slowed down due to prison time for gun charges. When he came back, Giggs dropped some of the hottest mixtapes in London. He was the one who told everyone the Ghetto Boys war was over with his lyrics, shouting out his crew and saying, "I ain't on that dead beef." SN1 released a full project but kept grinding on the streets too. Giggs faced challenges from the music industry and responded with his track F the Industry, boldly declaring they would take over the game no matter what. The police grew suspicious of SN1, especially after they allegedly killed one of their own members who crossed the crew, but nothing stopped Giggs and SN1's rise. In 2008, Giggs became the first rapper to win Best International Act at the BET Hip Hop Awards, gaining fans even in America. Back home, SN1 kept putting pressure on the Brixton crews. After one of Giggs' friends TMS was killed outside his house by Brixton, SN1 is said to have killed a Brixton gang member named Sense at a club full of people. Nobody was charged for Sense's murder, but most believed a Peckham member pulled the trigger. Soon after, SN1 allegedly executed one of their own, Big Larry, who represented Peckham but fell out with the crew. He was shot in the back of the head, and his death made headlines citywide. The war between Brixton and Peckham heated up as diss tracks flew and bodies fell. Gas Gang, Sneaky and YT dropped a Peckham diss called R3 Style, so Peckham rappers fought back on the same beat with Pecky Side, Bucky Side. Peckham kept the heat on with tracks like Record G and Police and Thief, while Brixton fired back with their own diss songs, pushing the beef into the spotlight. Both areas became dangerous zones no one without a gun or knife dared to step in, because just being near could mean death. The gangs rolled deep, sometimes with 30 or 40 members ready to fight. But the violence started cooling down as Peckham faced its own problems. The neighborhood had already gone through a civil war in the early 2000s. And in 2009 a new conflict flared after Snap, Capone and his friend Tam were accused of killing Mimer from the MO crew on Brandon Estate. Though the reason was unclear, Snap and Tam beat the charges. But one young crew member took the blame for carrying the gun. Shoot instant. Another Peckham crew lost big when Nutty was jailed for gun charges. Instead of serving his time quietly, Nutty tried to get a young man named Samuel Laguna to take the fall. When Samuel refused, he was shot dead and his car set on fire. Nutty was sentenced to 32 years for setting it all up, and another member, CS, got 4 years for torching the car. Peckham then plunged into a brutal internal war. Leo Estate, once part of Peckham, started beefing with other blocks and formed a crew called Let's GS. In September 2010, a man named Taz died in a motorcycle crash during a police chase. When people gathered to mourn, Lil Grim from Leo Estate was shot while paying respects. Around this time, Snap, Capone's older friend, got a 35-year sentence after Lil Grim was killed. A few months later, another man named Vessa from Crane Block was shot dead. 2 of his friends were stabbed too. Crane Block was part of Peckham, but with the civil war tearing through the area, no one was safe anymore. After Vessa's death, the younger guys on the block began handing out stop snitching flyers, warning everyone not to cooperate with the police. Meanwhile, the Beckham boys started beefing with the crew from Woolwich Rodovan though. Before all this, they had allegedly worked with Brixton together. What happened on Woolwich is one of the wildest stories in London gang history. Some of the Woolwich boys were heavy hitters in the streets. Then, shockingly, they began being recruited by ISIS to fight in the Middle East. These young men converted to Islam and were trained to go to war. 16 of them actually left their block and traveled to Syria to join ISIS, but it was a disastrous choice right after arriving. All 16 were killed in an airstrike. While Peckham was locked in its own internal battles, the violence with Brixton started to fade around 2010. That year, a man named Sylvester Acapala was shot and killed at Heron House in Peckham. At first, rumors spread that Gas Gang from Brixton was behind it, but later it came out that Sylvester was actually killed by someone from Peckham. Victim of the ongoing civil war within the neighborhood, Gas Gang wasn't slowing down. Though, in 2010, they stabbed a member of Trust No One, TN1, a Peckham set. Just 2 days later, 25 Gas Gang members surrounded a chicken shop in Brixton where TN1 was hanging out. The situation was tense, but luckily the police arrived before anyone got hurt. Gas Gang didn't stop there. They also murdered a man named Lil Zach, who was connected to a Peckham group called All About Money ABM. This sparked more beef between a BM and Gas Gang. Police said Gas Gang was involved in nearly 80% of the violent crimes in Brixton at the time. Peckham's crews were just as fierce, and that's what made the fight so dangerous. Both sides had many young men ready to jump into action, turning the area into one of London's most feared zones. However, as Peckham dealt with internal conflicts and Brixton faced battles with other crews, the constant back-and-forth attacks between Peckham and Brixton started slowing down. Even though Peckham and Brixton had the most intense beef in London, this kind of violence couldn't last forever. Both sides lost many people. After leaders were killed or sent to prison, it was only a matter of time before the fighting broke apart.